8 years ago, I thought I had won the lottery of fate. His name was Lysander St. James, tall, with a profile carved from obsidian, shoulders that filled out a tailored suit perfectly, and the effortless manners of old money aristocracy. We met at a corporate gala in downtown Atlanta, the kind where champagne flowed like water and everyone pretended they weren't sizing each other up for power, money, or connections. I was there on a work ticket from the mid-sized marketing agency where I was a junior account manager. I wore a borrowed black dress that fit well enough, but I still felt like an imposter among the glittering crowd. Lysander approached me near the silent auction table. He didn't open with a line. He simply asked what I thought of the signed Falcons jersey up for bid. His voice was low, smooth, confident, but not arrogant. We talked for 20 minutes, about football, about the city, about nothing important. And yet, by the end of it, I felt seen in a way I never had before. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. 3 dates later, he kissed me under the awning of a Buckhead restaurant while rain poured down around us. And I thought, this is it. This is how the movies start. He courted me with precision. Flowers delivered to my office every Monday, not roses, because he learned I preferred peonies. Dinner reservations at places I'd only read about in magazines. Weekends driving up to the North Georgia mountains in his Porsche, windows down, music loud, his hand resting possessively on my thigh. He told his friends and colleagues he'd gotten incredibly lucky with me. He introduced me to his parents at a Sunday brunch at the Cherokee Town Club. And even though his mother Octavia's smile never quite reached her eyes, and his father Pearl barely acknowledged my existence, I told myself it would get better with time. We married 10 months after that gala, in a ceremony at the St. James family estate in Buckhead. The mansion was everything you'd imagine: floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a pine forest, Italian marble floors, a manicured lawn that looked like a golf course. I walked down an aisle lined with white orchids, toward a man who looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I was 26, in love, and utterly convinced I was stepping into a fairy tale. The first 3 years were an ecstatic fog. I moved into the mansion and let myself be swept away by the luxury of it all. Lysander encouraged me to keep working. At first, "I love that you're independent," he'd say, kissing my forehead before bed. But gradually, gently, the questions started. One evening over dinner, he sliced his steak with those precise movements his father had taught him and said casually, "We've been talking about children lately. How do you intend to combine motherhood with working at that agency of yours?" I put down my fork. "That agency, Lysander, I love my job." "Of course, sweetheart." His voice was honeyed, patient. "But let's be honest. The pennies you earn barely cover your gas to the office. St. James. Development brings in enough for both of us." He reached across the table and took my hand, looking at me like a benevolent savior. "Don't you want to create a real home like my mother does?" At the mention of Octavia St. James, my back straightened automatically. She had the posture of European royalty and eyes that could detect a flaw from across a room. I'd already learned to dread her visits. A month later, I stood in my director's office, signing my resignation letter while watching gray February clouds over the city. My colleagues congratulated me, half envious, half awed. "Marrying a St. James, girl? You hit the jackpot." I smiled and nodded, but inside it felt less like a resignation and more like a surrender. Lysander celebrated that night with champagne on the terrace. "Now everything will be simpler," he said, handing me a sleek black credit card. "All expenses from one account. No confusion. It has a reasonable limit for household needs. If you need more, just ask. Just ask." Those 2 words became the biggest lie of our marriage. At first, the requests were small. A new dress for a charity gala. "Why do you need another one? Isn't the Navy one still good?" Groceries that went slightly over budget. $300 at Whole Foods. "Show me the receipts." "Did you really need organic berries in winter?" "Coffee with an old friend. $50 for lattes." "Why didn't you invite her here?" "We have a $5,000 espresso machine." I started justifying every purchase. I stopped buying books. We had a Kindle. I canceled yoga classes. I could follow videos at home. I stopped meeting friends altogether. It felt wrong to spend family money on lunches or drinks. My world shrank to the walls of the mansion, and Lysander watched the process with quiet satisfaction. Sunday dinners with his parents became a regular ritual. I'd spend all day preparing perfect roast, Polished silver, fresh flowers arranged just so. Octavia would arrive in her Bentley, scan the table like a forensic examiner, and always find something wrong. The forks are placed too far from the plates, Aziza. Basic etiquette. Napkins aren't folded that way in respectable homes. Hydrangeas at a dinner table? How quaint. Pearl St. James, founder of St. James Development, rarely spoke to me at all. In 8 years, he addressed me directly exactly 3 times, each time a variation of pass the salt. To him, I was furniture, necessary but not worth noticing. Lysander would watch these dinners with a small, proud smile. "You're a wonderful hostess," he'd tell me later. As if Octavia's approval was the highest prize I could hope for. Mother will be impressed one day. She never was. I told myself it was normal, that this was the price of the life I now lived, that I was lucky. That love meant compromise. But little by little, the compromises started to feel like chains. I stopped noticing how often Lysander worked late. I stopped asking why he sometimes came home smelling of a cologne. I didn't recognize. I stopped questioning the locked door to his home office, or the way he angled his phone away from me when texting. I was too busy trying to be the perfect wife, and he was too busy planning the next phase of his life, one that, I would eventually learn, no longer included me. It started with small things. A Tuesday evening when Lysander texted that he'd be home late, another important client, dinner that couldn't be rescheduled. I didn't think much of it at first. St. James Development was booming. New luxury condo projects were popping up all over Midtown and Buckhead. And Lysander was always closing deals. I made gumbo anyway, kept it warm on the stove, and ate alone at the long marble island in the kitchen, scrolling through Instagram feeds of friends I hadn't seen in months. He came home after midnight, tie loosened, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and something floral, definitely not his usual. Creda Ventus. I asked how the dinner went. He kissed my forehead absently and said, "Productive." Signed a big one. Then he disappeared into his office for another hour. I went to bed alone. The late nights became more frequent. Tuesdays and Thursdays mostly. He started leaving his phone face down on the counter. When it buzzed, he'd snatch it up quickly, smiling in a way that didn't include me. I told myself I was being paranoid. Marriage ebbs and flows. 8 years in, the honeymoon glow fades. That's normal. But then came the receipt. I found it by accident, folded in the pocket of his overcoat when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. Apex Sky Lounge, Atlanta's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Tuesday, 8:05 p.m. Bill for 2, $612.47. Dom Perignon, Wagyu steaks, oysters, chocolate fondant. A romantic menu if there ever was one. That same Tuesday, he told me he was working late on quarterly reports. "Don't wait up, sweetheart. I'll be buried in spreadsheets till past 10. I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, holding that small slip of paper, feeling the world tilt. It wasn't just the lie, it was the extravagance. For years, I'd been grilled over every $40 grocery overage, every $200 pair of shoes. I'd stopped buying coffee out because we have the machine at home, and here he was dropping $600 on one dinner with someone else. I didn't sleep that night. I kept seeing the itemized list in my head. 2 entrees, 2 desserts, 1 very expensive bottle of champagne. The next morning, I dressed in my most nondescript clothes, gray sweater, jeans, plain jacket, and drove my old Honda Civic, the one he'd allowed me to keep after selling my Lexus because we don't need 2 luxury cars downtown. I parked across from Sovereign Tower, where his office was, and waited. At 11:30 a.m., he walked out, laughing, relaxed, arm brushing against a woman I recognized immediately. Calista Royale? I'd met her once, briefly, when Octavia insisted she come refresh our guest rooms. Tall, dark-skinned, runway model figure, Swiss boarding school accent. She'd walked through my home in Louboutin, making notes in a leather-bound planner, dismissing my hand-embroidered curtains as soulful, but not quite current. For a house of this caliber, Lysander had hung on her every word. Now here she was, laughing at something he said, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Red trench coat, hair perfect, looking like she belonged on a magazine cover. They got into his Porsche and drove off. I followed. They went to the same restaurant where we'd celebrated our 3rd anniversary. Lysander had declared it too pricey for regular visits back then. I parked 2 blocks away and watched through the panoramic windows for 2 hours. They held hands across the table. She touched his face. He kissed her palm. All the tenderness I remembered from our early days was now directed at her. When they left, they kissed against her silver Mercedes, long, deep, unhurried, like teenagers who didn't care who saw. I drove home in a daze, hands shaking on the wheel. The weeks that followed turned me into someone I didn't recognize, a private investigator in my own marriage. Tuesdays and Thursdays became their ritual. High museum events, shopping at Phipps Plaza. Romantic, walks in Piedmont Park. I watched him buy her jewelry at Tiffany's, paid with a card I didn't know existed. Weekly flower deliveries to her midtown condo. Extravagant arrangements from the city's top florist. Nothing like the grocery store tulips I got on my last birthday. The worst was the day at the Equus Club. I parked outside the fence and watched them play tennis, laughing. Competitive, perfectly in sync. On the terrace, Octavia and Pearl sat with a distinguished older man. I recognized from magazines. Magnus Royal, Callista's father, owner of Royal Holdings. Pearl was shaking his hand enthusiastically. Octavia touched Callista's arm with a warmth I'd never once received. They all watched the couple on the court like proud parents at a debutante ball. That night, lying beside Lysander as he slept, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was rage, pure, cold, focused. They weren't just replacing me. They were upgrading. Callista wasn't just prettier, younger, more polished. She was strategic, a merger disguised as romance, St. James Development plus Royale. Holdings, Deemst Empire Expansion. I was the outdated model being traded in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or afraid. I felt dangerous. The next morning, after Lysander left for another meeting, I did something I'd never dared before. I entered his home office. I'd noticed years ago where he hid the key under the bronze eagle statue on the bookshelf, but I'd never used it. Good wives didn't snoop. Today, I wasn't a good wife. The office smelled like him. Leather, cedar, power. Walls lined with photos of him shaking hands with politicians, developers, celebrities. Bookshelves full of business tomes no one ever opened. I went straight to the bottom drawer of his desk. It wasn't even locked. The first folder stopped my breath. Bank statements. 3 accounts I'd never seen. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, another offshore entity. Balances in the tens of millions. Hundreds in some cases. Next folder, Northwest Holding LLC. Sole owner, Lysander St. James. Financial flows that made my head spin. Millions moving in and out like water. Then the personal folder. Receipts. Patek Philippe watch, $80,000. Vacation in the Maldives listed as a business trip to New York. $15,000 per week. Cartier, Chopard, Tiffany's, dozens of jewelry purchases over the past year. Not one for me. And finally, the folder marked Legal Issues. Correspondence with his divorce attorney, Auntie Wright. Detailed plans for asset protection in case of separation. Shell companies, offshore transfers, trusts, and a handwritten note in Lysander's elegant script. Post-divorce merger WI's Royale Group. Projected profit 300%. AL. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of my obsolescence, and felt something harden in my chest. For an hour, I photographed everything. Every page, every receipt, every note. Hands shaking but precise. When I left the office, I locked it, replaced the key, and by the time Lysander came home, I was at the stove stirring pasta sauce, smiling like the perfect housewife. "How was your day, darling?" "Great, closed a big contract." I nodded, smiled, served dinner, and started planning. The next day I called Sarah. We'd been close in college, drifted after I got married. She was a forensic accountant now, sharp, successful, still the same warm laugh. I was ashamed to reach out after years of silence, but I needed help. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Decatur, far from Buckhead eyes. She looked amazing. I felt frumpy beside her. "Lord Aziza, you're wasting away," she said, hugging me tight. "Did your prince put you on a starvation diet?" I slid my phone across the table. Photos of the documents. "Please look at these. But it has to stay between us." She scrolled, ordered another coffee, then a third. Her face grew darker with every image. Finally, she looked up. "Aziza, this is money laundering. Classic real estate scheme. Dirty cash comes in, buys properties through straw buyers. Your husband's company buys them at inflated prices. Difference becomes clean profit, then moves offshore." She paused. "He's in deep. Felony's deep. What do I do? You go to the authorities, now. She gave me a name, Detective Moses Stone, Economic Crimes Division. A man with principles. I clutched the note with his number all the way home. Calling him was harder than breaking into the office. I dialed and hung up 10 times before letting it ring. Stone speaking. Hello, my name is Aziza St. James. Sarah gave me your number. I have information about financial crimes and real estate. He didn't hesitate. Can you come in today? Office 312, 1 hour. The precinct smelled of old coffee and toner. Detective Stone was tall, mid-40s, kind eyes, firm handshake, family photos on his desk, a healthy plant in the corner, people you trust on site. I told him everything. The control, the isolation, the affair, the receipt, the office, the documents, showed him the photos. He studied them carefully, brow furrowing deeper with each page. Finally, he leaned back. This is serious, Mrs. St. James, very serious. Money laundering, tax evasion, possible RICO predicates, ties to organized crime. Your husband could be looking at 15 to 20 federal years. The number hung in the air, but you need to understand, if we move forward, assets from criminal proceeds get seized. House, cars, accounts, everything bought with dirty money. I swallowed. And if I cooperate fully? He studied me. Then things change. Immunity, protection, you. Keep what was acquired legally. Before the crime started. What do you need from me? Access, documents, recordings, you're on the inside. He trusts you, or thinks you're too naive to suspect anything. I smiled bitterly. I've been playing naive for 8 years. I can keep going. He nodded slowly. Let me talk to the DA. If they greenlight this, and they will, this case is gold. We'll formalize everything in a few days. Until then, act normal. Don't tip him off. I laughed softly. Normal is all I've been for years. 3 days later, I signed the cooperation agreement. Full immunity, protection, right to keep legally acquired assets, and the green light to gather more evidence. The game had begun, and this time I was playing to win. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life. By day, I was still Aziza St. James, the quiet, dutiful wife. I woke at 6:30, made Lysander's favorite dark roast coffee in the $5,000 machine. He loved to mention, packed his gym bag with freshly laundered towels, kissed him goodbye at the door with a smile that never wavered. I cooked elaborate dinners, shrimp étouffée, braised short ribs, whatever recipe I'd found that week to keep him pleased. I ironed his shirts with extra starch in the collars because he liked them crisp. I asked about his day, listened to his stories about challenging negotiations and difficult investors, nodded sympathetically when he complained about stress. At night, when the house was silent and he slept beside me, often smelling of Callista's perfume, a light, expensive jasmine that clung to his skin, I became someone else entirely. I waited until his breathing deepened, then slipped out of bed. Barefoot, phone in hand, I moved through the dark mansion like a ghost. The office key was still under the bronze eagle. I entered silently, photographed new documents, replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Detective Stone's team had given me tiny, professional-grade recording devices, smaller than a dime, adhesive-backed. I hid one under the lip of his desk drawer, another inside the landline base he still used for confidential calls. A third went in the hallway near the front door, where he sometimes paced while talking. They also helped me install tracking software on his work laptop. He left it charging in the office most nights. I only needed 10 minutes. The program ran silently, copying every email, every file, every deleted item to a secure cloud folder accessible only to the investigators. I learned things I never wanted to know. Calendar entries marked K, Apex 8 p.m., K, High Museum Gala, K, Maldives. 4 Seasons, flight confirmations, hotel reservations for 2. Love notes he typed and then deleted, but the software recovered them anyway. You looked incredible in that red dress last night. Can't stop thinking about your legs wrapped around me. I read them in the guest bathroom at 3 a.m. Tears silent on my cheeks, then dried my face and went back to bed. The hardest part was keeping the mask in place. One evening in early October, he came home later than usual. Jacket slung over his shoulder, hair slightly mussed. He smelled strongly of jasmine. Rough day? I asked, setting his plate on the table. Grilled salmon, asparagus, wild rice. His favorite, you have no idea, he sighed, loosening his tie. This new mixed-use project in Midtown is killing me. Investors breathing down my neck. I poured him wine. Anything I can do to help? He smiled, that old charming smile that used to make my heart flip, and reached for my hand. Just keep being you, sweetheart. Coming home to this, it's what keeps me sane. I smiled back, squeezed his hand, and inside something twisted. Because I knew exactly where he'd been. I'd followed him that afternoon. He'd left the office early, driven straight to Callista's condo in Midtown. I sat in my Honda 3 blocks away, watching the entrance through binoculars Detective Stone had loaned me. They emerged 2 hours later, her hair tousled, his shirt untucked, laughing as they got into his Porsche. I didn't follow them to dinner. I didn't need to. I already knew. Another night, he took a call in the office with the door closed. The hidden recorder caught every word. Relax, Marcus. We've got half the zoning board on payroll, and the IRS guys are taken care of. We'll route this tranche through the Caymans as usual. Same shell companies. The scheme's bulletproof. A pause. Yeah, I know the partners are getting antsy. Tell them the properties are moving faster than projected. We'll clear another $40 million by year end. Laughter. These idiots don't even realize how much we're skimming off the top. I sent the audio file to Detective Stone at 2:17 a.m. with a single line. New recording. Call with partner Marcus. His reply came 10 minutes later. Outstanding work. Aziza. This ties 3 more players. The picture grew clearer and uglier every week. The dirty money came from an organized group running illegal diamond, imports out of West Africa, and unregulated rare earth mining in South America. Cash bundles arrived in Atlanta via private couriers. Straw buyers, people paid small fees to put their names on deeds, purchased. Distressed properties all over the city, St. James. Development then bought those same properties at massively inflated prices. The difference between the real purchase price and the inflated one became clean. Profit on the company books, which Lysander then transferred offshore. But greed is greedy. He'd started stealing from his own partners, underreporting the amounts coming in, pocketing the difference, using it for personal luxuries, the Maldives trips, the Patek watches, the jewelry for Callista, $50,000 diamond necklaces, $10,000 weekends in Miami, all funded by money his criminal partners thought was still in the pipeline. Detective Stone called it skimming from sharks. They don't forgive that kind of betrayal, he warned me during one of our covert meetings in a park in Decatur. When this breaks, you'll have federal protection, but be careful until then. I was careful. I was also exhausted. Some nights I couldn't sleep at all. I'd sit in the dark living room, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the pine forest, wondering who I'd become. The woman who used to dream about marketing campaigns and weekend hikes with friends now lived a double life, perfect wife by day, undercover informant by night. Lysander noticed something was off. You've been quiet lately, he said one evening over dinner. Everything okay? I looked up from my plate, forced a soft smile. Just tired, I think. Maybe coming down with something. He reached across the table, touched my forehead like a concerned husband. You don't feel warm. Maybe you should see Dr. Ellis. I'll be fine. Probably just need more rest. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You have been thoughtful. Reading a lot? I'd started leaving mystery novels around the house. Agatha Christie, Tana French as cover. Yes, I said lightly. Got hooked on thrillers. They're gripping. He chuckled, condescending as ever. Didn't know you liked that trash. Well, good for you. Knowledge is power, as they say. I smiled again. Oh, darling, you have no idea. In early November, the autumn air turned crisp, and the leaves in Buckhead blazed red and gold. Lysander came home one evening with a manila envelope and a serious expression. We need to talk, he said, pouring himself a scotch. My heart stuttered, but I kept my face calm. Of course. What's wrong? He sat across from me in the living room, envelope in hand. Aziza, this isn't easy, but we haven't been happy for a long time. We've grown apart. You know that. I let my eyes fill, just enough. Lysander, what are you saying? I've filed for divorce. He slid the papers across the coffee table. I'm not a monster, he continued quickly, rehearsed kindness in his voice. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I'll rent you a nice apartment, Vinings maybe, or something in Midtown, and I'll provide support. $2,000 a month should cover modest needs. You're still young. You'll get a job, meet someone more, suited to your lifestyle. $2,000 a month. After 8 years of control, isolation, and now betrayal. After millions spent on his mistress, I let the tears come now, real ones mixed with rage. Lysander, why now? We can try counseling. He shook his head, firm but gentle. It's over, sweetheart. We're from different worlds. You deserve someone who can give you the simpler life you're used to. I nodded slowly, wiping my eyes. Inside, I checked a mental box. Arrogance confirmed. He stood, patted my shoulder awkwardly. Take your time reading the papers. We'll keep this civil. After he went upstairs, I waited 10 minutes, then texted Detective Stone. He filed today. Reply, perfect timing. We're ready when you are. Hearing date? Late November. Good. We'll have everything in place. I went to bed that night beside the man, who just discarded me like an outdated appliance. Listened to him fall asleep and felt nothing but cold determination. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to believe he'd won. Because the fall would be so much sweeter. The court date was set for November 22nd. Detective Stone asked one last time, do you want us to arrest him before the hearing? We have enough now. I thought about it. About Octavia's smug face. About Pearl's silent disdain. About Callista sitting in the gallery, diamonds flashing, waiting to take my place. About Lysander's condescending pat on my shoulder as he handed me the divorce papers. No, I said. I want to be there. I want to watch. Stone smiled for the first time in weeks. You've earned it. The plan was simple. I would play the broken, submissive wife one final time. My lawyer would be Mr. Abernathy, a tired-looking legal aid attorney who specialized in low-income divorces, no threat. I would dress plainly, speak softly, let them think they were destroying someone weak, and in a sealed white envelope, I would deliver my letter to the judge. Everything, the recordings, the documents, the cooperation agreement, the criminal case number, was ready. The trap was set. All that remained was the performance of a lifetime. And I had been rehearsing for 8 years. November 22nd dawned cold and gray, the kind of Atlanta morning where the wind cuts straight through your coat. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest room, the one I'd moved into after Lysander, filed the papers and chose my outfit carefully. A plain black dress, slightly too big, bought years ago for a funeral. No jewelry. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Minimal makeup. I wanted to look exactly like what they expected. A defeated, mousy housewife about to be gently discarded. Inside, I was steady. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control. I drove myself to the Fulton County Courthouse in my Honda, parked in the public deck, and walked in alone. No entourage. No expensive lawyer. Just me, clutching a worn leather purse that held the white envelope. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, wood-paneled and fluorescent lit. Lysander was already there, seated at the petitioner's table with Auntie Wright, the legendary divorce attorney who charged more per hour than I used to earn in a week. Lysander wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit, tie perfectly knotted, hair immaculate. He looked like a CEO about to close a merger. He glanced at me as I entered, offered a small, pitying smile, and patted the empty chair beside him as if to say, sit quietly, this will be over soon. I didn't sit there. I took my place at the respondent's table with Mr. Abernathy, the elderly legal aid lawyer who'd agreed to represent me pro bono. He looked rumpled and nervous, shuffling papers with trembling hands. Perfect. The gallery began to fill. First came Callista Royale. She swept in wearing a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Diamonds flashing at her throat, the very necklace Lysander had bought with stolen money, $50,000 worth of betrayal, sparkling for all to see. She took a seat in the front row, crossed her long legs, and looked me over with the satisfied smirk of a victor surveying the spoils. Octavia St. James arrived next. Regal in black Chanel, 3 rows of pearls, posture ramrod straight. She settled beside Callista, and the two immediately began whispering, heads close, sharing amused glances in my direction. Octavia's expression said everything. Finally, we're rid of the mistake. Pearl St. James entered last, silent and imposing as always. He didn't look at me, not once, as he took his seat beside his wife. To him, I was still invisible. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise. The Honorable Judge Varys King presiding. Judge King entered, a black woman in her mid-50s, sharp eyes behind strict glasses, robes impeccable. She had a reputation for fairness, intelligence, and zero tolerance for theatrics. I'd researched her quietly. She was exactly the judge I'd hoped for. She took her seat, scanned the file, then looked out over the courtroom. Be seated. We are here today for the dissolution of marriage between Lysander St. James, petitioner, and Aziza St. James, respondent. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record. Chanty Wright stood first, voice smooth and confident. Chanty Wright on behalf of the petitioner, Lysander St. James, Your Honor. Mr. Abernathy rose unsteadily. Harold Abernathy on behalf of the respondent, Aziza St. James. Judge King nodded. This is a no-fault divorce. Petition with contested property. Division and spousal support. Mr. Wright, you may proceed with your opening. Wright launched into a polished narrative. A loving marriage that, through no one's fault, had simply run its course. Lysander, a respected entrepreneur, had provided a luxurious lifestyle for 8 years. Aziza, lacking higher education beyond a basic marketing degree she hadn't used in nearly a decade, had contributed nothing financially. No children, clean break, minimal alimony. Generous, really. Abernathy's opening was brief and weak, standard. Arguments about homemaking contributions, emotional labor. He sounded apologetic even making them. Then came the witnesses. Octavia took the stand first. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd never been questioned in her life. I tried very hard to welcome Aziza into our family, she began, voice dripping with saintly regret. But the differences in background, education, and refinement were simply too great. My son, out of kindness, offered courses, tutors, etiquette lessons, anything to help her grow into the role. But Aziza showed no interest in self-improvement. At business functions, she struggled to converse intelligently with partners. It reflected poorly on the company. Every word was a knife, expertly twisted. She painted me as lazy, ungrateful, socially embarrassing. Pearl's testimony was shorter. My son deserves a partner who matches his level, intellectually, socially, professionally. Aziza regrettably did not. He still didn't look at me. Callista didn't testify, but her presence was testimony enough. She sat poised, elegant, the perfect future Mrs. St. James. Finally, Lysander himself. He stood tall, voice rich with noble sadness. Your Honor, I loved my wife deeply. But over time, we became strangers. I take responsibility for choosing poorly. Aziza is a good person. We simply come from different worlds. I ask only for a clean dissolution and reasonable support to help her transition to a lifestyle more suited to her. Reasonable support, $2,000 a month. I kept my head down, shoulders slumped, the picture of quiet devastation. Judge King listened to it all without expression. When Abernathy's weak cross-examinations yielded nothing, she turned to me. Mrs. St. James, do you wish to testify? I stood slowly, voice soft and trembling. Yes, Your Honor, briefly. I walked to the stand, clutching a tissue. I love my husband, I began, letting my voice crack. I tried to be a good wife. I cooked, kept the house, hosted his parents. If I fell short, I'm sorry. I never meant to embarrass anyone. Lysander looked at me with gentle triumph. Callista's smile widened. Octavia allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. I sat back down. Judge King addressed Abernathy. Does the respondent have any additional evidence? Abernathy stood, holding the white envelope with both hands as if it might explode. Yes, Your Honor. One final piece, a letter from my client, to be read into the record. Wright frowned. He hadn't been warned. Lysander leaned forward, suddenly alert. Judge King took the envelope, opened it, and began to read silently. The courtroom went completely still. I watched her face change. Professional interest. Surprise, wide-eyed amazement. Something close to delight. She read to the end, removed her glasses, wiped the corners of her eyes, and then unexpectedly laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, rich, head-back laugh that echoed through the room. She looked out at the stunned faces. Lysander's paling by the second, and laughed again. This, she said, holding up the pages, is the best thing I've read in 20 years on this bench. Truly, one should never underestimate the quiet housewives. Lysander shot to his feet. Your Honor, what is in that letter? Judge King put her glasses back on, still smiling. I'll read it aloud, for the record. She cleared her throat. Dear Judge King, for the past 2 months, I have served as a confidential informant for the Economic Crimes Division of the Atlanta Police Department and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Attached is a certified copy of my cooperation agreement. My husband, Lysander St. James, is the subject of an active federal investigation into money laundering, racketeering, tax evasion, and fraud through St. James Development and affiliated entities. The laundered amount exceeds $210 million over 10 years. I have personally provided investigators with 347 audio recordings of incriminating phone conversations, 264 photographs of financial documents, full remote access to Mr. St. James's work computer, video surveillance of meetings with known criminal associates. The scheme involved receiving cash proceeds from illegal diamond, imports and unregulated mining, operations, using straw purchasers to acquire properties, then selling those properties to St. James Development at inflated prices to legitimize the funds. Additionally, Mr. St. James embezzled millions from his criminal partners, using the stolen money for personal luxuries, including extensive gifts to his mistress, Calista Royale. A criminal indictment has been issued. Arrest is imminent. Under federal forfeiture laws, all assets derived from criminal proceeds are subject to seizure. I request that this court consider my cooperation in its ruling. The silence was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Callista's hand flew to the diamond necklace, fingers clutching it like a lifeline. Lysander's face had gone gray. This is absurd. Your Honor, this is slander. She doesn't know anything about... Judge King raised a hand. I'm not finished, Mr. St. James. She continued reading. I draw the court's specific attention to the necklace, currently worn by Ms. Callista, Royale in the gallery, purchased at Tiffany's for $50,000 with funds embezzled from Mr. St. James's criminal partners. Receipt of property, known to be criminally derived, may constitute fencing or complicity. Callista let out a strangled sound, ripped the necklace off, and bolted from the courtroom, heels clacking frantically down the hall. Octavia stood, mouth opening and closing like a fish. This is a monstrous lie. My son is a respected... Sit down, Mrs. St. James, Judge King said calmly, or I'll have you removed. Octavia sat. Pearl stared straight ahead, face ashen. Lysander turned to Wright in panic. Do something. Wright, for once, had nothing to say. I stood slowly. No more slouched shoulders. No more downcast eyes. I looked directly at Lysander. I understand exactly what I've done, I said, voice clear and steady. You used our marriage as cover for a decade of crime. You isolated me, controlled me, planned to discard me penniless for a more profitable alliance. You all looked at me like I was nothing. Your biggest mistake was believing I was. The doors at the back burst open. Detective Moses Stone entered with 2 federal agents in windbreakers. Lysander St. James, Stone announced. You are under federal arrest for money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. The agents moved forward. Lysander backed away, eyes wild. Aziza, you don't know what you've done. These people, they'll kill me. The handcuffs clicked. He looked at me one last time. Shock, betrayal, fear. I met his gaze without flinching. Goodbye, Lysander. They led him out. Judge King waited for the doors to close, then spoke. In light of the extraordinary circumstances and Mrs. St. James's documented cooperation with federal authorities in dismantling a major criminal enterprise, this court rules as follows. The marriage is dissolved. All assets acquired with legal income prior to the commencement of criminal activity, approximately 40% of the total marital estate, remain with Aziza St. James. Additionally, as a key cooperating witness, Mrs. St. James is entitled to federal whistleblower compensation. Mr. St. James's petition for minimal alimony is denied. Case closed. She banged the gavel. I walked out of the courthouse into a light Georgia snow, rare, soft flakes drifting over the city. A taxi took me to my new apartment in Venings, modest but mine. In my bag, documents confirming my legal share of the estate. Bank transfer notification, the first installment of government compensation. Outside the window, Atlanta glimmered under fresh snow. The radio played an old Kelly Clarkson song. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I smiled. 8 years in a gilded cage hadn't broken me. They had forged me. And the woman I'd become? I liked her very much.